Hello, welcome back to the channel. So I've talked a lot about bosses, and for the most part I do think that the bosses are generally fine, especially a lot of the newer ones I do actually like quite a lot, even if some of them can be kind of annoying, like the Flame Raver. But there are some that are pretty outdated, and I think could really what a lot of them are getting for Apocalyptic Shadow. Starting with Svarog. The main problem with him is that he just doesn't really do anything. Like, he is one of the only bosses who has not appeared in Apocalyptic Shadow at all, so he's kind of just been stuck with like the same moveset. Like, he has two single target attacks that don't even do like that much damage, and you can just heal it off a lot of the time, and an AoE attack that also doesn't really do that much damage. The only really unique thing about him is the hand thing that he summons, which also I think doesn't really work as a mechanic, because no matter what it does, it just feels bad. Like, if it takes one of your supports, then it's just gonna feel like it did nothing because you could just kill it immediately. And if it takes your DPS, it's gonna take forever to kill it or to break it, and you know, to get them back unless you have like a sub DPS, and you might just lose straight up just from that, and that, so that also is just gonna feel bad. But even then, a lot of the time you can counter it pretty easily by just ulting or something and just killing it as soon as it spawns. So it almost just never feels like it does anything, unless you just get super unlucky. Like, it does have an explosion attack that can do a lot of damage, but that's almost never going to happen because he has to take a turn to overload it and then has to actually, you know, attack you. So most of the time you're just gonna kill it before that can even happen. Overall, he's just kind of like an HP sponge, and that's it. If he was able to spawn like multiple different types of robots instead of just the hand, I think that could make him a bit more interesting. Like maybe one that can like do like AoE damage, maybe one that can stun your characters or something, even though that might be a bit annoying. Maybe one that gives like, you know, barriers, because the other robots can also give barriers. Now, you know, not every boss needs to have like super high damage, but they usually at least have like something to kind of make up for that. Like Hole being the biggest example of this. Like, none of his individual attacks do that much damage, but he attacks a lot to make up for it. But Svarog doesn't really have anything like that. He just kind of hits you, and that's it. Even like the mech enemies that he usually spawns with are also just not really that threatening. The only annoying ones maybe like the traffic light one, because he can just give himself a barrier. But moving on to a boss that I feel is pretty forgettable in the grand scheme of like what bosses are in the game, that being the Ebon Deer. The Deer has a very similar problem to Svarog, where it's just kind of an HP sponge, but is also really bad against AoE since you can just kill the plants, which a majority of the characters have now. I'm pretty sure almost every character in 3.x has had AoE, besides Archer. Like, and you know, because the plants are like the main mechanic of the boss, if the plants don't do anything, then all the boss has is just its normal attacks, which are really just not threatening at all. Especially if you have someone like Aventurine who could just block all of the attacks with his shields, and can also counter the plants as well. But even if you don't have shields, the plants can still be countered because you can just cleanse Outrage, which is really the only way you're going to lose against this boss. So it's kind of just RNG of if your healers get outraged or not, which is not that great of design. Like, the Deer and the plants do get a damage buff the more buffs that they have, but the damage increase is almost unnoticeable a lot of the time, since it's only a 6% buff, and the buffs that they give themselves aren't even permanent. Like, the defense buff only lasts for 1 turn, and the attack buff that the plants give only lasts for 2 turns. So a lot of the time, it's just not gonna matter. I do like that it actually does get a strong attack if you try to ignore the plants, so it actually, you know, incentivizes you to kill the plants besides just getting attacked by them. But the main problem with this boss is that it can be pretty tedious, especially in a lot of modes like MOC. The plants can have a lot of HP, you know, since the plants and the Deer can heal themselves. It sometimes just kind of feel like you're just hitting a brick wall until it dies, especially since, unlike a lot of other bosses, there isn't really any sort of unique mechanic that you need to play around that can kind of help you mitigate the healing and stuff, besides just killing the plants, which a lot of other bosses summon minions, so that's not even really a unique thing. Like, you know, Nicodor has like the whole war armor thing, and can also, you know, take half of your HP. Aventurine has the whole, like, you know, dice and point system, but the Deer is just kind of bring AoE, and that's it, which is not even that unique for a boss. By the way, if you are enjoying the video, maybe consider hitting the like button and subscribing. It helps me out a lot. Anyway, like, the Swarm boss does a very similar thing, but I think it's just way better, even if it can be kind of annoying, since it feels a lot more rewarding to kill the bugs since they deal damage to the other enemies and increase how much damage they take. I don't really know how you would make this boss better, besides maybe having like a mechanic where once you've killed a certain number of plants, it like does a chunk of damage to the boss, or maybe like prevents it from being healed for a couple of turns or something. Kind of like what Hule has, where, you know, once the bar that it gets becomes full, he takes a chunk of damage. Or maybe having it so like the plants can do more, because some of the plants only do like one thing. Like the ones that allow him to do the big attack, they just spawn the fruit, and that's it. They can't even do damage to you, you know? So maybe if they could actually do a bit more, like have more attacks and stuff like that, it could make it a bit more interesting to fight. But moving on to what I think is the worst designed boss in the game, that being Cirrus. Like, unlike the other two bosses, the problem with Cirrus isn't necessarily just that she doesn't do enough, it's that you don't even really fight her at all. Like, you are just fighting normal enemies that are slightly buffed, which is really boring for a boss fight. Now, I can kind of see, like, this not being an awful idea in theory, since, you know, she is a ghost and she's meant to be possessing the enemies. The problem is that, one, a lot of normal enemies are just not that interesting to fight. I mean, there's a reason people use, like, Acheron or Phaidon to skip a lot of fights when they're going through areas. Even some of the more, like, elite enemies, like the T-Rexes or, like, the big stone dudes, just don't do enough for it to feel like a boss. And two, Cirrus herself does almost nothing. Literally, the only move that she has is that she can action advance the enemies and give them buffs, like, you know, depending on the phases. Like, in the first phase, she gives a damage buff, and then in the second phase, she gives a speed buff, and then in the last phase, she does both. But even then, the buff is only 6%, so it is barely noticeable unless you let it stack, which is almost never going to happen. So it really just feels like you're just playing old Pure Fiction as a boss. And there's a reason they changed Pure Fiction, because it was kind of boring at some points, which Cirrus is really just the most boring boss to fight. And I think the devs know that people don't really like this boss, since like Svarog, she has not appeared in Apocalyptic Shadow at all, and it was also removed from the pool of bosses that can appear in Divergent Universe after 3.3. Like, I think that all they would really need to do to make Cirrus better is just have her actually do something. Like, maybe she can, like, kill off one of the enemies to buff another one, since she's meant to be, like, controlling them. Or even just have the phases, like, progressively get, like, stronger enemies. So, like, you know, the first phase would just have kind of normal fodder enemies, but by the third phase, she would have, like, super strong elite enemies that she can, like, you know, buff up and stuff. Like, I think that more than any other boss in the game, she really needs a rework. And I do think that the devs could make her better, since most of the reworks that we have gotten, I do think have made the bosses a lot more enjoyable. The new version of Aventurine feels way more fair, since supports aren't just almost guaranteed to get hit. The new version of Hule, even if not perfect, it does feel way less annoying than a past version. And to be honest, I think most of these bosses do really need new versions, since Apocalyptic Shadow could really use the variety, because they've just been kind of using the same couple of bosses, like Hule and Cocolia have been used so much. But overall, I think those are like the main bosses that have problems. There is like Bronya and Japard, who have kind of been downgraded to mini-bosses to help Cocolia. But I do think they kind of work better as mini-bosses than as their own, like, standalone boss, since they didn't really do that much. Like, Japard kind of just, like, gave barriers, and that's kind of it. He did kind of hit hard, but that's about it. And that's not really unique for a boss. A lot of bosses can hit hard. And the only real thing that Bronya had was that she had, like, a big shot and could go immune when she summons her minion. But I think that, like, especially Bronya works way better paired with another boss, since she literally has a move that advances another unit. It just makes the Cocolia fight overall feel like there's a lot more threats besides just the pillars. But overall, I do think that the boss design has gotten a lot better, and each boss feels a lot more unique and like they have their own mechanics that they don't even need to think about. They do kind of have the problem of having way too much HP, but I think it's more of just a problem with MOC than the bosses themselves. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.